So I want to apologize for my shirt. I almost wore a shirt with a collar today, but collars are insane. Like, what purpose do they have? So I bailed on the collar. I used to be a famous graphic designer, and that's like saying you're a famous plumber. Like, nobody cares but other plumbers. But my career was here in San Francisco, and I worked for companies like this. Is anyone from JP Morgan? One person. I almost slipped my wrists working for JP Morgan. Okay, so I was in a conference room in New York, and they were all men. Everyone's wearing a suit. We're waiting for the CEO to come in. I've got a suit on, and these guys are talking about their bonuses or something, and I just thought, how did I get here? Like, this is not my life. So at the same time, I took a pause, and I started thinking about these big challenges. And I actually worked with Al Gore on this climate reality project. And I realized that all of these big challenges, if you graph them, they're hockey sticks, right? They're exponential curves. So I'm sure everybody here in the room believes in climate change. Population growth almost maps exactly to that. You might not feel it in the United States, but globally, we have exponential population growth. Species extinction almost maps exactly to climate, right, to CO2 in the atmosphere. It's what's called the sixth extinction. Deforestation, globalization, not necessarily a bad thing, but as GDP rises in the world, everybody all over the world wants all the stuff that we have. Ecological debt, this is that we're using up the Earth's resources faster than the Earth can replenish it, and it actually speeds up. We use it quicker and quicker. Technology explosion. This is a weird one. Last year, I worked with OpenAI, which is based here, which is really trying to keep artificial intelligence on the guardrails. So by 2045, we're going to reach something called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and it'll be smarter than every human brain in the world combined, right? Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's really sort of a big issue. All of these things are unprecedented in human history. So I started thinking of how we can go from the way things are, the status quo, business as usual, to the way things need to be. Typically what happens, somebody goes, hey, I have a new idea, and then wham, it gets shot down. Let me play devil's advocate. We could never, what would the lawyers say? That's nuts, right? So these, people standing up with big ideas, often there's this kind of opposite reaction. Why? We're all victims of these pre-existing neural pathways. An example of that is shark attack off the coast of Australia. Surfer gets munched. Widely reported on the news, people in LA stay out of the water, right? So completely irrational behavior, but in our brain, this is what's happening. A, shark attack, bad. There's a superhighway neural pathway to a behavior, stay out of the water, right? So this is the way our brains work. Once we have a neural pathway in place, we're pathological about following it, whether we're conscious of that or whether it's rational, right? So it's just an example of how our brains are extremely facile at establishing pathways and following them. Culture conspires against new ideas and innovation. When you get a lot of brains all thinking along the same pathways, that will conspire against new ideas. Status quo acts like gravity. So this line represents the way things are, right? So things just tend to kind of keep bumping along. Somebody has a bold new idea, the status quo will act like gravity, trying to pull that big idea down into alignment. What has to happen at that inflection point is what I call thinking wrong. You can't think right and expect to kind of have a bold idea and the wherewithal to get there. Traditional problem-solving orthodoxies, this is where JP Morgan comes in, won't work, right, for this kind of radical innovation. So the rational, everything has to be rational before you start. ROI, you have to know you're going to make money before you begin. Best practices, the future will be defined by what worked in the past. Strategic plan, everything has to have a strategic plan. So these aren't necessarily bad, but they exist up in the quadrant of the certain and the known, right? And so this is really comfortable. Large organizations, corporations, governments, religions, big nonprofits, this is where they want to be because it's comfortable. They understand what this is. Thinking wrong, which is where I think we need to be, is in the uncertain and the unknown, right? So you have to start down there if you're trying to come up with something nobody's ever seen. Start thinking about natural wrong thinkers, like Steve Jobs, with Apple, Jane Goodall in science, Bjork in music, Muhammad Ali in sports, Yvon Chouinard with Patagonia, Elon Musk, although he's gone off the rails several times. But I think these are natural wrong thinkers. So there's something about their brain hardware or chemistry that allows them to have the big idea and actually make it happen. So I started thinking about the rest of us, right? The 99% of us who aren't kind of already hardwired for this. Started a program in 2003 called Project M. And the way this, I had an awesome mustache 16 years ago. The way this worked is I would gather a group of young creative people right after graduation, take them to an unfamiliar, usually distressed place. This is the rainforest of Costa Rica. And they would immerse themselves in the community, figure out a project, think wrong about how to do it, and get it done in a really short period of time. That was New Orleans after Katrina, East Baltimore. This is rural Alabama. A project called Blank Lab. This was up at RISD in Providence. Reykjavik, Iceland after their financial collapse. Great project called Pizza Farm in Connecticut. We built horseshoe pits in Detroit in a vacant lot. And this is after the BP oil spill in the Gulf Coast of Alabama. And so I realized that through the process of running this about 10 years, that there was a methodology. So a way of getting past those hurdles that prevent you from having big ideas and then getting them done. So the first is be bold. Steve Jobs called it the dent you want to make in the universe. And the way we think of this is if you're going to invest your time, energy, resources, you might as well set a bold kind of standard, right? Because things will conspire to bring it down. Next one is get out. And this really isn't doing ethnographic research. This is getting out of your orthodoxies and patterns because you have no pre-existing neural pathways. Let go. This is the creative engine. Your brain is pathological about following pathways. So right now, I have a thought and a vocalization, right? I don't have to think about it because I have pre-existing pathways. Try to talk wrong sometimes. Put words together in a nonsensical sequence. It's almost impossible. So you have to actually trick your brain into thinking wrong. Make stuff. A lot of you are designers, so this is familiar. But if you're in a room with JP Morgan executives, they'll just talk ideas to death, right? And there's a point where you just have to say, I don't know if this is going to work. Let's just try it and see what happens. That's small. Super important. A lot of times in large organizations, you have a crazy idea and there's a lot of fear. We're going to lose money, I'll lose my job, I'm going to look stupid. But when you frame it as a small bet, I don't know if this is going to work, let's just try something and see what happens. Allows you to kind of get momentum. The last one is move fast. After you do a portfolio of small bets, how do you get momentum based on what you see working? So I'm going to show you some projects that show kind of how this process works. Some of these are student projects through Project M, and some are professional. This is in Hale County, Alabama, one of the poorest counties in America. We've done a lot of work down there, and we found out that 1 out of 4 households don't have fresh water. They're either on shallow wells like this that are contaminated with sewage because they don't have septic tanks or they don't have water hookups at all. And so we came up with this project called Buy a Meter, where we were going to raise money, buy water meters, get the guy out to hook these families up to water. We identified Oprah as the key influencer. She's from Mississippi, right nearby. She had given money before to this county. We're like, if we get Oprah, game over. So we did a big newsprint piece. All of these projects are super low budget. And I think it just makes everybody more resourceful. So we found a newsprint printer in Alabama. We got, I think, 5,000 copies for $800. Put Oprah on the cover. Oprah has one, so does Paris Hilton. Charles Manson uses one, and you have one too. And Herbert Banks doesn't, Jackie and Damian Green. These are real people in a place called Mason's Bend. Got in trouble for this spread. I won't go into that right now. But it's actually not a right anywhere in the United States. We just kind of assume that everybody has water here. Costs $425 to buy a meter, get the guy out there, put up a website, start getting donations. And then at the very end of the project, these were all graphic designers, and they wanted to print T-shirts to give out just as a gift. And we had an advisor, a guy named Brian Collins, come down from New York. And he said, you guys are idiots. If you're going to do a T-shirt, make it apply to the project. Don't just, do a souvenir. So we did this. We got white T-shirts from Dollar General, hand-cut silk screen. We didn't have a photo thing. And it says 425 decimal point on it. And we sold those for $425 each. And I think we raised about $50,000. And Brian said, never underestimate the desire of wealthy people to consume and pacify their guilt at the same time. So what was, I think wrong about this was, it wasn't you give a donation, get a free T-shirt. You had to buy the T-shirt and you get a free donation. So two of the guys, Ben and Tim, who were in that Project M session, were working at Facebook. Oprah came through and they grabbed her and got out the piece, and she was kind of pissed off about the whole thing. No money from Oprah. But we did raise enough money to connect 100 families there. Next one is called Not a Bike. And the challenge was, how do you get young people to use bikes for everyday transportation? It was actually at the beginning a few years ago of this fixed gear, single speed movement. And we were like, maybe we can ride the wave of this kind of fad and just get people on bikes. Did another newsprint piece, less cars, gas, less is more. Independence, health, freedom, you are nada, put up a website again. And the way this worked is you paid $100 to be a member of NADA. You got your picture on the home page. And then your membership card was a raw steel bike frame. We ordered, I think, about 150 of these from Taiwan, sold out immediately. And it was time to reorder. And we're like, this is weird that, we're trying to get people on bikes, but we're shipping frames over from Taiwan. And so, this is him. I went ahead. So the thinking of the steel frame was you had to build it up yourself, and you could paint it or not paint it, and that if somebody had to DIY their bike, they'd be more invested, ride it more, take care of it. So that was the idea. I heard about this guy, Marty Odlin, who had started the Bamboo Bike Studio in Brooklyn, and he was in workshops having people build bikes out of bamboo. And about 100 yards from our studio in Alabama at the time, there was this natural bamboo growing. So Marty came down, helped us figure out how to harvest it. You have to flame treat it to get the moisture out. And we got a hold of a space. This part of Alabama, you can get spaces on Main Street for virtually nothing. So we built out this bike lab and started making bamboo bikes in the same technique as the studio in Brooklyn. They look really funky. It's actually not electrical tape, it's carbon fiber tape dipped in epoxy. They look like this. They're actually really strong and durable. 4 of the students built bikes and rode them to San Francisco to promote the project. We then came up with a brand we called Alabamboo, trying to connect bamboo production to Alabama like Florida oranges or Georgia peaches. Then this guy got involved, Lance Rake from the University of Kansas. He's an industrial design professor. And he said there's got to be a more elegant way to make bikes out of bamboo. And he and his students came up with this, uses bamboo slats around a carbon fiber core, which allowed us to make a much stronger and lighter tube. Started making those down in Alabama. This was an early prototype. And then did another Kickstarter campaign. I think we raised about $60,000. This was called the Semester Bike, and started building them down in Alabama. So the project at this point had morphed from get people on bikes to now this micro enterprise in rural Alabama. They just kept prototyping and making stuff, a folding bike, commuter bike. This one was super cool, using woven bamboo around a carbon core. It looked awesome. It didn't work worth shit. It was super flexy, but it did work for skateboards and fenders. So we did another Kickstarter, and we made these bamboo woven skateboards called Beacon Alley. And so I really like this project because of the way it kind of ebbed and flowed and became something completely different than we imagined at the beginning. This is a professional project for a company called SodaStream. This machine was designed by Yves Bahar, who's here in town. They happened to have, at the time, the most fearless CEO I ever worked with, a guy named Daniel Birnbaum, who was once in Israeli special forces, and nothing scared him. So he was going right up against Big Soda. So one of the things they would do is, they called this the cage, and they would put this in public places. They put it in the airport in Atlanta, the head of Coca-Cola. They immediately sued them for they called it their intellectual property. You can see the Coke stuff in there. SodaStream came back and said, awesome, go pick up your intellectual property all over the world, and Coke dropped the lawsuit. But you can see, it's a visualization of how many bottles and cans the average family, almost 11,000 in 5 years. We often work with this guy who's a genius named Tucker Nichols. He's an artist here in the Bay Area. And what Tucker does is just brilliant. So as we're doing these Think Wrong workshops, he's taking everything in and making drawings through his own kind of sensibility and mind. And he just starts putting these things up around. And they almost always inspire the project. So it's really using an artist's sensibility to kind of drive the ideas. Clearance pre-bottled soda, must bring own truck. Guess we could all just stop drinking soda, then we'd live in a world without soda, bummer. So he did this little sketch. This is Big Soda on the left, SodaStream, freeing the bubble from the tyranny of the bottles. And this really kind of drove the whole campaign. We did 3 Super Bowl commercials. This is the first one, and it really shows how this little sketch became their advertising campaign.
With SodaStream, you can save 2,000 bottles a year. If you love the bubbles, set them free. SodaStream.
So last year, Pepsi bought SodaStream for $3.2 billion. I don't know if that's a success or failure, but it's kind of interesting. This next project was with a group here in the Bay Area called Not for Sale that fights human trafficking. This particular project was about villagers in the Peruvian Amazon who are largely indentured slaves in mining operations because there's no other opportunity. So we ran this Think Wrong Blitz on the coast, and we try to get as diverse an audience as possible, or participants. There were guys from McKinsey and Google. One of the guys on my team was a pitcher for the Giants, Jeremy Affeldt. And he was funny because when he came in, he's like, I don't even know why I'm here. I didn't graduate high school. I'm an idiot and I'm going to add no value. But he actually did, and you'll see how. Another guy on my team was a doctor at Stanford. He was an oncologist working on cancer. And he said there's a plant in the Amazon called cat's claw that has cancer-fighting properties, and they have hardly any cancer there. So Jeremy, the pitcher, said, let's just make tea out of that and sell it. And so out of that came this called Rebel. So the roots, extracts, bark, berries, and leaves is what it stands for, all of which are sourced in the Peruvian Amazon. And so we came up with this. It looks like kombucha, but it's actually called a tonic. And we launched it with these three. Very successful. It's in all the Whole Foods and everything now, and then launched another line of those. And it was so successful, they started a secondary business called Just Business, doing social enterprises that make money that then go into their nonprofit. And so all of that, none of that would have happened without the process. I think this is my last example. This group of students was really stuck at the beginning of this project. They couldn't agree on a project or an approach, so they went to a bar, started drinking beer, and everyone revealed a hidden talent. So one kid was a tennis champion in high school. This girl, Rosanna, in the white sweater, said, well, I like pie. And I was like, I don't, like, that's not a talent. And I thought it was really stupid, to be honest, at the time. But it was almost March 14th, so 3.14 pi. They thought that was super clever. So they did a one-day pop-up thing they called Free Pie Day. And they baked pies with M's in them for Project M and just set up on the street of this little town. This was in Maine at the time. And they realized there was an alchemy to pie and coffee that lubricated conversation that could then bring people together to come up with projects. So they came up with this concept they called Pie Lab, and decided to go down to Alabama where we had this building used as a studio. And they took over half. I said, okay, you guys can do a pop-up Pie Lab, take over half the studio, I'll give you $600 total. And so they had to build pie boxes and tables and chairs from IKEA, cups and saucers from Goodwill. Remember, the total budget was $600 here. And then this part of Alabama is deeply segregated. There are white churches, white restaurants, black restaurants. They never would come together and sit at the same table to have a meal. So we had one table, no takeout. And it was a big success that summer. And I think partly because Archie and Brian there, they were from Brooklyn and they were outsiders and there was no pre-existing code for who could go to this place. That was a big success. So the next small bet was we got a hold of this space on Main Street. It's actually across the street from the bike lab. That's what it looked like when we started. And they had to build this out as the permanent Pie Lab. As part of Alabama, in the summer, super hot. It was like 100 degrees. They had to level the floor. And there's a part of this that I really like, that things are hard. You know, it's not easy. Budgets are low, and it's hard physical labor. We got this wood for free from sharecropper cabins that had been dismantled, built these big rolling walls to reconfigure the space, vinyl letters and signs, and opened up. That's what it looked like. We came in second in the James Beard Awards for restaurant design and lost out to the Guggenheim that year. Full service restaurant. That's my daughter making pies there. And then we started doing other programs. This is one called Youth Build, pie baking contests, art classes for kids, bike rides, open mic nights. None of this stuff was happening before Pie Lab. And then other buildings on Main Street started getting renovated because we got so much attention. New York Times Magazine did a story. We started having tour buses come in. And then the whole town started getting transformed. This is the old hotel that's renovated. And NBC News said it's one of the most influential zip codes in America. So if you think back to Rosanna saying, you know, I like pie, and like where this ended up. So that's it. Thank you.